How far would you go to have your freedom? For Max, freedom was death in a wooden box 6 feet under. He had the perfect plan. Everything was lined up. Until fate refused to let Max have his way. This is a good plan. Welcome to Phobia, a podcast about horror, true crime, and mysterious events. Stories from the darkest corners of imagination, history, and unexplained reality. Each week, we bring you a new horror fiction, a dark crime, or a documented mystery. Some stories stay with you long after they've ended, and that's okay. The good ones always do. I'm Corvin Ash, and this is Phobia. The morning bell had just rung, but Max remained motionless. His cellmate, a young drug dealer who'd only been inside for 8 months, knew better than to disturb him during this ritual. Everyone in D Block knew about Reed's morning meditation, as the guards mockingly called it. What they didn't know was that these moments weren't about finding peace. They were about feeding rage. Behind his closed eyelids, Max replayed the same images that had tortured him since his arrest. Detective Vincent Harlow's smug face as the jury forewoman read the guilty verdict. His wife Elena's pale features as she collapsed in the courtroom. His 5-year-old daughter Lily's bewildered expression as social services led her away while he was handcuffed and unable to even embrace her one last time. "Breakfast in 10, Reed," a guard announced, rapping his baton against the bars. Max opened his eyes, the granite-hard gaze of a man who had nothing left to lose. 7 years had taught him to move through the prison's routines like a ghost, present but detached, compliant but never broken. 3 months after his conviction, Elena had died in custody, awaiting her own trial, officially from a pre-existing heart condition. But Max knew better. She had died of a broken heart, of the crushing weight of a justice system that had steamrolled them both based on Detective Harlow's fabricated evidence and coerced testimony. Elena, who had never even known about Max's work as a safecracker, had been charged as an accomplice based on nothing more than Harlow's vendetta against Max for a job years ago that had embarrassed the detective. And Lily, his beautiful, innocent Lily, had vanished into the foster care system. His few permitted calls and letters had gone unanswered. It was as if she had ceased to exist the moment the gavel fell. "Reed, mail call," the guard announced unexpectedly, sliding an envelope through the bars. With fingers that suddenly trembled, he tore it open. The letter was brief, clinical, devastating. Lily had been adopted. Her new family had legally changed her name. All parental rights had been permanently terminated given the nature of his crimes and sentence. Something broke inside Max in that moment, the last fragile thread connecting him to a future beyond vengeance. If he couldn't have his daughter back, then there was truly nothing left for him except making Detective Harlow pay for destroying his family. That night, as the lights of Black River Penitentiary dimmed, Max lay on his bunk staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with newfound urgency. 7 years of good behavior had earned him privileges and trust. 7 years of watching, learning the patterns of the prison, identifying weaknesses in the system. 7 years of waiting for the right opportunity. He could wait no longer. The need to escape, to find Harlow, to make him suffer as Max had suffered, became overwhelming. Not just for himself, but for Elena, who had died alone and afraid. For Lily, who would grow up never knowing the truth about her parents. As the night guard passed his cell, Max's mind drifted to the prison's infirmary, where he'd spent 3 days last month after a workshop accident. Old Frank Sanders had been on duty, the quiet, hunched man who worked in the prison morgue and infirmary. The invisible man whom nobody noticed. Sanders, who had access to the one thing that regularly left the prison walls unexamined, the coffins of dead inmates. Sanders. The thought settled in Max's mind like a key finding its lock. For the first time in 7 years, Max felt something besides hatred. He felt hope. Max's opportunity came when he reported to the infirmary for his monthly blood pressure check. The regular nurse was on break, leaving only Sanders tidying up the examination room. "Blood pressure check," Max announced, settling onto the examination table. Sanders nodded without looking up. "Nurse Williams will be back in 15 minutes. "That's fine, I can wait." Max studied the man carefully. "You're Sanders, right? You handle the bodies when inmates die." Sanders paused his sweeping, clearly uncomfortable with direct conversation. "Just part of my job." "Must be lonely work," Max said casually, "dealing with the dead." "The dead don't bother me," Sanders replied, his voice surprisingly soft. "It's the living that cause all the trouble." "You live alone, Sanders?" Max asked. The question hung in the air. Sanders stopped again, leaning on his broom. "What's it to you?" "Just making conversation." Max shrugged. "Seems to me a man who works with both the living and the dead might understand the value of a fresh start." Sanders gave him a sharp look. "You fishing for something, Reed?" The use of his name surprised Max, so the invisible man noticed things too. "Maybe I am," Max admitted. "Maybe I'm thinking a man in your position, with your access, could help someone, and maybe that help would be worth something substantial." Sanders snorted. "Like what? Prison commissary credits?" "Like $100,000, Max said quietly. "Cash, already stashed outside." The broom clattered as Sanders fumbled it. "You're talking crazy." "I'm talking opportunity," Max corrected, "for both of us." The sound of approaching footsteps silenced them. Sanders quickly resumed cleaning as Nurse Williams entered. As Max was leaving, Sanders brushed past him. "Laundry detail, tomorrow, 2 o'clock, he whispered, so softly Max almost missed it. The next day, in the laundry room's noisy chaos, Sanders appeared to collect soiled infirmary sheets. As he passed Max's station, he spoke without making eye contact. "How would it even work? And why should I trust you?" Max sorted sheets methodically. "Because I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm offering you a business deal. You help me disappear, I make you rich. Simple." "Nothing simple about breaking out of prison," Sanders hissed. "It is when you use the only exit no one checks," Max replied. "The morgue." Sanders' pale eyes widened slightly. For the first time, Max saw something beyond the man's careful blankness. A flicker of forbidden interest. "Come to the infirmary tomorrow," Sanders said after a long pause. "Complain about chest pain. I'll be on cleanup duty alone." "We don't have long," Sanders whispered, wiping sweat from his pale forehead. "Night guard makes rounds every 20 minutes. "Then let's get to it," Max said. "You handle the bodies when inmates die. That's our way out." Sanders' eyes darted nervously. "You want to, what? Play dead?" Max shook his head. "No, I want to share a coffin with someone who is dead. For real." The color drained from Sanders' already pallid face. "Jesus Christ." "Think about it," Max pressed. "Bodies leave here all the time. The cheap pine boxes go straight into the ground at the county cemetery. No family, no fuss, no examination." "And you want me to dig you up after?" Sanders' voice cracked slightly. Max nodded. "A few hours later, you come to the cemetery, dig down to the coffin, open it, and I walk away. You make it look like grave robbery or vandalism gone wrong. By morning, I'm counties away, and you're $100,000 richer." Sanders paced the small room, running trembling fingers through his thin hair. "It's insane. If they catch me, they won't. Max interrupted. Because you'll have nothing to do with my escape directly. I'll get myself into the coffin. Sanders stopped pacing. How? Max leaned forward. You tell me the procedure, how you prepare the bodies, where they're kept, how long before burial, and you give me access, a key, a door left unlocked, whatever I need to get in there without you being involved. And the body? You'll just lie on top of it? If I have to, Max said flatly. But I'm guessing there's room to squeeze in alongside. Those coffins aren't exactly tailor-made, are they? Sanders shook his head. Basic pine boxes, standard size. He hesitated. There's usually some space, especially if the inmate was smaller. Sanders explained the process. When someone died, the prison doctor confirmed death. Then Sanders prepared the body. The body went into cold storage until the paperwork cleared, usually 2 days. Then Sanders would place the body in the coffin, which stayed in cold storage until the funeral home came around 10 a.m. They were usually at the cemetery by noon. So I'd need to get into the morgue after you've placed the body, but before the funeral home arrives, get into the coffin with the corpse, and then endure, 4 hours at most until I'm underground? Max asked. About that, Sanders confirmed. But Reed, how will you breathe? I'll bring a small oxygen cylinder from the workshop, Max said. It's small enough to hide, lasts hours. What do you need from me specifically? Sanders asked finally. Max knew then that he had him. I need the morgue key, hidden somewhere I can access it quickly when the time comes. And the service entrance to the morgue needs to be unlocked during your shift. That's it. No direct contact when it happens. And after, at the cemetery, you come with a shovel around midnight. Cemetery has no security except a fence. You dig down to the coffin lid, open it, and I'm gone. Sanders took a shaky breath. When do you want the key? Tomorrow, Max said. Hide it under the loose brick by the workshop entrance. The next day, Max found the small brass key. He created a wax impression and returned the original key for Sanders to retrieve. From the impression, he carefully crafted a duplicate in the metal shop. With the key secured in a small slit he'd made in his mattress, all Max could do was wait for someone to die. A week passed, with no deaths, then another. Max was beginning to wonder if the universe was conspiring against him when the prison PA system crackled to life during lunch. Medical emergency in the infirmary. All medical staff report immediately. Security lockdown in effect. Heard it was a stabbing, muttered an inmate at the next table. Some punk went crazy during his insulin shot. It came 3 hours later when the warden made a terse announcement. Incident in the infirmary has been contained. Medical services temporarily relocated to B Block conference room. Regular schedule resumes tomorrow. The prison grapevine filled in the details by dinner. Someone had been stabbed multiple times with an improvised weapon. The victim had bled out before help could arrive. Max had no way of knowing if Sanders was working that shift, but it didn't matter now. When night fell, and the prison settled into its uneasy slumber, Max carefully retrieved his duplicate key and the small oxygen cylinder he'd smuggled from the workshop. He packed these and his trusty lighter into a small pouch fashioned from a stolen pillowcase. By this time tomorrow, he would either be on his way to freedom or suffocating in a pine box 6 feet underground. 3:20. As expected, Officer Mercer's heavy footsteps retreated down the corridor, on his way to his regular coffee break. Max slipped through his unlocked cell door. Tumble locks never had a chance against a talented safecracker like Max, and moved silently, hugging the wall, careful to stay in the camera blind spots he'd mapped over years of observation. The service corridor leading to the morgue was accessed through the laundry room. Max encountered no one. The duplicate key slid perfectly into the service door lock. He was in. The corridor beyond was pitch black. He navigated by touch, one hand trailing along the cold cinder-block wall. When his fingers found the morgue door, he paused, listening. Nothing. He inserted the key, turned it slowly to minimize noise, and pushed the door open. The morgue was somehow even darker, a void so complete it seemed to swallow even the concept of light. The air was significantly colder, carrying that distinctive smell. Clinical death masked by chemicals. Moving with careful precision, Max edged forward until his thighs bumped against what felt like a metal table. He skirted around it, continuing toward the back of the room. His outstretched hands eventually found a different texture. Wood. The coffin. Max ran his hands over the coffin's surface until he located the metal clasps securing the lid. He carefully disengaged them one by one. With agonizing slowness, he lifted the lid. The hinges protested with a soft creak that sounded thunderous in the silent room. The interior of the coffin was an even deeper darkness. Max couldn't see anything, not the body he knew must be there. His fingers brushed against fabric, the standard prison burial outfit. The body felt cold, already stiffening with rigor mortis. Just a shell, he whispered to himself. Nothing but an empty vessel. He set his small supply pouch on the edge of the coffin and extracted the oxygen cylinder, testing the valve to ensure it was working properly. Now came the moment he'd been dreading. With methodical efficiency, Max climbed into the coffin, trying to distribute his weight to avoid disturbing the body. The space was tighter than he'd anticipated. He had to squeeze himself alongside the corpse, their shoulders touching in the confined space. The cloying smell of death chemicals filled his nostrils, mixing with the pine scent of new wood. With one final check that everything was in place, Max reached up and slowly pulled the coffin lid closed above him. The soft thud as it settled into place sounded like finality itself. He secured the latches from the inside and then lay back, immersed in darkness so absolute it seemed alive. The reality of his situation crashed over him then. Sealed in a box with a corpse, underground burial just hours away. For one wild moment, panic threatened to overwhelm him. His heart hammered against his ribs. His breathing accelerated dangerously. Max forced himself to count slowly, willing his pulse to steady. He had no idea how much time passed in that lightless tomb. Minutes stretched like hours. The only sounds were his own carefully measured breathing and the occasional creak of the pine box adjusting to his weight. A sudden jolt snapped him fully awake. The coffin was moving. Voices, muffled but discernible, came from outside. "Jesus, this one's heavy," a man complained. "They're all heavy, Pete. That's why they call it dead weight," another voice responded with dark humor. The funeral home staff had arrived. Max lay perfectly still as the coffin was lifted and carried. The journey seemed endless. Out of the morgue, down corridors, a brief blast of fresh air, then the rumble and vibration of what must be a vehicle. They arrived at the cemetery. Max heard the low murmur of the perfunctory service being conducted above him, standard procedure for prisoner burials. Then came the sensation of being lowered, the coffin swaying slightly as straps controlled its descent into the grave. The muted sounds of earth hitting the coffin lid began, first in scattered clumps, then in more sustained thuds as shovelfuls of dirt covered his temporary tomb. The sounds grew more muffled as layers of soil accumulated above. Eventually, they stopped altogether. A profound silence descended, broken only by Max's careful breathing and the occasional creak of wood as the earth's pressure settled around the coffin. He was buried alive, exactly as planned. Now all he could do was wait for Sanders to come dig him out. As time passed, Max's mind drifted. He saw himself walking up to Detective Harlow's suburban home. In his dream, Max rang the doorbell with steady hands. Harlow answered, his face shifting from confusion to recognition to fear as Max raised a gun to his chest. The vision changed. Max saw himself in a sunlit park, sitting on a bench. A teenage girl approached. Lily, no longer the 5-year-old he remembered, but unmistakably his daughter. Her eyes, so like Elena's, widened with recognition despite the years and the new name she'd been given. A sudden jolt yanked Max back to his grim reality. How long had he been underground? Sanders should have come by now. Midnight was the agreed time. Hours must have passed since the burial. Where was he? Slow down, Max whispered to himself. Think it through. Maybe Sanders was waiting for the cemetery to be completely deserted. Maybe he'd encountered a security guard and had to delay. Reasonable explanations. Nothing to worry about yet. The air in the coffin was growing noticeably staler. He tried to shift position, but his limbs had stiffened, pins and needles giving way to a disturbing numbness. Another hour crawled by. Worry began to gnaw at him. What was taking Sanders so long? "Come on, you bastard," he muttered. $100,000 is waiting. Annoyance bloomed into anger as more time passed with no sound of digging from above. The anger was good. It kept the creeping fear at bay. But as the oxygen cylinder's hiss grew fainter, fear began to assert itself. What if Sanders had been caught? What if he'd been arrested before he could reach the cemetery? What if he was in an interrogation room right now, confessing everything to save himself? Or worse, what if Sanders had never intended to dig him up at all? No, Max whispered. He wouldn't. He couldn't. But doubt had taken root. His breathing quickened, wasting precious oxygen. The space seemed to be shrinking around him, the pine walls pressing closer, the weight of earth above growing heavier. Surely it must be well past midnight now. The cemetery would be deserted. Nothing should be preventing Sanders from digging. Unless he wasn't coming at all. Real fear gripped Max then, visceral terror. He was going to die here, buried alive, exactly as he'd planned, but with no rescue at the end. The perfect escape had become the perfect tomb. The body beside him seemed to be changing, softening in places, the chemical smell giving way to something more organic. Max tried to shift away, but there was nowhere to go in the narrow box. His oxygen was nearly gone. Each breath brought less relief, the air growing thick and toxic with carbon dioxide. His head pounded, thoughts becoming sluggish. Death was coming, slow and suffocating. 6 feet of packed earth pressed down on the cheap pine coffin. Even if he could somehow break through the lid, the dirt would rush in, burying him instantly. Horror settled over him, the complete, existential terror of facing his own extinction. All his plans for revenge, all his dreams of seeing Lily again, all his carefully nurtured hatred. None of it mattered now. In a final desperate act, Max reached for his lighter. If he was going to die, he would at least see the box where he would spend eternity. It took 3 attempts before the wheel caught, producing a weak flame that seemed blindingly bright after so many hours of perfect blackness. The wavering light cast grotesque shadows. Max blinked as his eyes adjusted, then turned his head to see who had accompanied him into this pine prison. Maybe it's someone he knew. The face beside him was waxy, features slack in death's repose. Despite the chemical preservation, the beginning stages of decomposition had begun to soften the face, but there was no mistaking it. Sanders. Frank Sanders lay beside him, his eyes half closed, staring sightlessly at the coffin lid. The shock struck Max with physical force. His hand trembled violently as his brain struggled to process the impossible. Sanders was here. Sanders was dead. Sanders would never come to dig him out. "No!" Max gasped. "No, no, no!" The stabbing in the infirmary. It hadn't been some random inmate. It had been Sanders himself. While Max had been preparing for his escape, Sanders had already been dead. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in Max's throat. The cosmic joke was too cruel to be believed. He'd crawled into a coffin with a corpse, never realizing it was the very person meant to rescue him. The lighter slipped in his sweat-slicked fingers, the flame wavering dangerously close to the coffin's interior. The lighter flame caught the edge of the burial shroud covering Sanders. A small flame bloomed, bright orange against the sterile white fabric. Max watched it, transfixed, as it spread to the lined wall of the coffin. The remaining oxygen in the cylinder found the flames, accelerating their growth with a sudden whoosh. Fire raced along the coffin's interior, consuming it with voracious hunger. Heat seared Max's skin, smoke filled his lungs, but he didn't struggle. There was nowhere to go, no escape to be found. As consciousness began to fade, as the flames consumed the small space that had become his world, Max's thoughts turned one last time to Detective Harlow. The man who had destroyed his life would never know how close Max had come to exacting revenge. "Harlow!" Max screamed through cracked, burning lips, the words lost in the roar of the flames. Above ground, a cemetery night watchman paused on his rounds, frowning at a faint noise rising from a freshly dug grave. He approached cautiously, making the sign of the cross when he heard the muffled sound, almost like screaming. The watchman turned away. By morning, only a slightly sunken patch of earth would mark where Maxwell Reed had finally, truly died. 16-year-old Lily Taylor, renamed after her adoption, stared at the small white pill in her palm, heart pounding as the pulsing music of the party vibrated through the floorboards beneath her. Her new friends watched expectantly, their encouragement a steady pressure against her hesitation. With a swift motion, she swallowed it, chasing it with lukewarm beer. An hour later, sprawled on an unfamiliar couch, the world softening around her, Lily's thoughts drifted unexpectedly to fragmented memories of a man with kind eyes. A face from another life, before the adoption, before she became a Taylor. She knows he is still alive, still in prison. Half conscious, floating in chemical warmth, she made a decision that felt suddenly urgent, necessary. Tomorrow she would write to him, this stranger who was once her father. As darkness claimed her, Lily clutched this resolution like a talisman, unaware that miles away, beneath cold cemetery soil, any chance of reunion had already turned to ash. I am Corvin Ash, and this was Phobia, where stories move between reality and nightmare. Thank you for walking this path with me. If you liked this episode, consider following the show or leaving a review. It helps more than you know. You can find Phobia on social media at Phobia Podcast for a glimpse of what's coming next, or to share your own most unsettling stories. Next week, we'll return with something new, a dark case, a mind-bending mystery, or a blood-chilling story. Whatever it is, it will stay with you. Until then, stay safe